Okay, here's a little documentary on how I flatten out my persimmon drivers. I had a ABS student recently that wanted one of these drivers, and this would be very, very similar to what Ben Hogan would have been using through most of his career. So I set this one up at 48-degree lie angle and put a super stiff pole shaft in it. Not really shafts you can go out and buy. I had to tip this thing about 4 inches, and I used actually an early to mid 70s Ping 1-iron shaft. So it's got an iron shaft in it, and then that shaft is tipped about 4 inches, and then an extender put on the backside. So I'm just going to kind of run through the process here and show the various steps for anyone that would want to undertake this, or at least have an appreciation as to what goes into doing this. So the first step here is to remove the head from the Ping 1-iron. Now, the reason that I use these shafts is they're very, very stiff, and they're long. They're the longest iron shaft that you can get in a 1-iron. So it's the best shaft, I think, to stick in a driver to get it stiff enough to handle, a 15-ounce driver head. So that's why I use these, and that's what I gained myself. I've been playing these for a long time. So pretty simple here. You're going to take out a blowtorch and heat up the hosel, get it nice and hot, and it'll break the epoxy bond, and you can just twist off the head. Then I'm going to clean up the shaft and hit it with a file, kind of the edge of a file, and rough up the tip of the shaft so when I glue it into the persimmon wood, it's going to hold. The epoxy is going to hold. So after grinding on that thing, it's going to look like this. So I'm a big fan of the Tony Penna persimmons. Tony Penna was the designer for most of the great McGregor releases that Nicholas and Palmer and everybody was using. He started his own company, and I just love the heads. I love how they sit. I love how they look, and that's why I chose this club to work on, Tony Penna. So I think I had a dozen of them laying around, and I think this was the best one. So the first step here is to remove the old shaft. The old driver shafts are just too loose, too whippy to support what this customized club is going to be when I get this thing up to 15 ounces. Going to need a lot stiffer shaft in there. So we're going to get ready to put that Ping 1-iron shaft in it. So drill it out. There's a pin in there, and come in through the bottom, through the bore through, drill out that pin, and then we can start working on getting the old shaft out of the club. This is probably the hardest part of the process right here. So once I get that pin drilled out, I can take the drill bit and hit it with a blowtorch and get it almost kind of red hot, stick it back in there, and that'll heat up the shaft that's in there and help break the epoxy bond. So it can be pretty struggling sometimes to get this to work, but it does work eventually. You just keep heating up the drill bit, putting it back in there, and when you see a little bit of smoke coming out, then that's usually means that the epoxy bond has broke, and then you can start trying to work the head off the old shaft. So once we finally get that shaft out, then this is what it looks like. We just got the persimmon head shaft out, and we get ready for the next stage. So this is basically what's going on. I'm going to take this 54-degree lie angle and drop it down to 48, and I'm putting in a much thicker shaft, so I'm going to have to cut off part of the neck and re-bore the hole. So we'll get working on that process here. So I'm going to make a little mark here on the neck at an angle perpendicular to the shaft, and I'm just going to take a hacksaw and just cut that neck right on that line. So this is what it's going to look like after you cut the neck, and get ready to start repairing the old hole and getting ready to drill the new one. So here I'm going to mix up some epoxy. I like the JB Weld, the slow cure, a little harder, and add some sawdust and fill that hole with epoxy and sawdust. And then I'm going to let that dry for a couple of days. Next I'm going to mark the neck with a piece of tape, get out the protractor, and set this thing up at 48 degrees. I want to really get this spot on. I want it to be just perfect. So next I'm going to get out some drill bits, and you can see on the left I'm going to start with some very small bits and gradually just get bigger and bigger until I get to 11/32, and that'll be my final size. So it's a very, very careful, tedious process here. So this is the most critical part here, following along that tape line and getting a very, very precise bore through not only the lie angle, but also how it sets up, whether the shaft's coming in a little forward or back, or you're just getting it square, whether you've got a little bit of hook lie or open or whatever. So this is the real skill part, I think, here. You want to have a good eye and know what you're doing to drill this hole. But you could practice on a couple of old drivers or something until you get a feel for it. It's not too hard after you do a couple of them. So after messing with this one for a while, I got it right on the 48 degrees, and then I'll set it up on kind of a square cabinet or something and take a look at how it's sitting, and I got this one sitting real square, so this one really went in well. So now it's time to mix up some more epoxy and epoxy that shaft into the head. So be generous with the epoxy and put it in there, and then let that sit for a couple days. So now I'm going to work on the grip side of the club and put in the extender. I like to have it down in there about almost 4 inches down into the new shaft, but the extender is going to slide down in there, and then I'm going to rough up that shaft with the file and epoxy that in, and then I will cut that extender to the final length where I'm going to set this up at 43 1/2 inches. So here I put it on the machine grinder and get that roughed up so that the epoxy is going to hold correctly. So the total length of this extender ended up being just about 8 inches, so quite a bit. And now do the final cut at 43 1/2 inches. Now we're back to the epoxy, and we're going to mix up some more epoxy and mix this with sawdust and start putting that on layer by layer and rebuilding the new neck. So we want to have a nice tapered neck on there with the new epoxy and sawdust. I think it was helpful when I was young in high school. We could take wood shop. I don't know if they still offer classes like that in most high schools, but it was nice that they did. So I got a little feel for working on things when I was young. So then I'm going to file this down and get this nice and smooth and get it ready to put some whipping on. So it's looking pretty good at this point. So here I'm just putting on some tape to get the thinner extender piece that's going inside the new shaft. I've got to build that up to get that flush and get that prepped for just putting a new grip on. So now I had to set up the weight, and I want to get this thing just a hair above 15 ounces. So I drilled into the back of the club, going to back weight this one and pour some lead in there. So drill the hole and heat up some lead in a little ladle with a blowtorch and just pour it in there, let it cool, and then epoxy it in there. So to this club I'm adding an ounce. So I'm using a 1 ounce fishing weight because I'm a fisherman and I have lots of these 1 ounce weights around. So now we are just a shade under 15 ounces, and when I put the grip on, we're going to get this thing to 15.3, which is perfect weight. So now it's time to whip the club, and I guess I could probably do a whole video on that, on how to do it. It's a little tricky, but it's something I've been doing my whole life, so it doesn't take me too long, maybe half an hour or so to work on that and get the club whipped. So here's kind of the final product, and this one really turned out great. So this would be the old technology. I think a great technology. These are the heavier clubs with the center mass, smaller heads, more compact, weight distributed behind the sweet spot and where you're striking. And in this case, a flatter line goal. So this is what Ben Hogan and his contemporaries would have been using. George Knudsen would have been using something like this. This is a great golf club. It's going to teach you how to swing the club well, and it's going to stop you from over accelerating at the top, and you're going to be hitting the golf ball with a lot more mass, and you don't have to turn quite as fast as you do with a lightweight club. So different technology, excellent results. A lot of great ball strikers used this kind of approach towards hitting golf balls. So there it is. So these are pretty neat. They're one-of-a-kind clubs. No two are going to be exactly the same. And I'm always after the perfect driver, trying to get the absolutely perfect. And I think this is the best one that I've ever made. And it was a little hard putting it in a box and sending it down to Florida to an ABS student, but I feel good about it. I can make another one, and I'll probably be starting on another one soon. And as soon as somebody wants one. So maybe you understand why they're as expensive as they are. It is very labor intensive. I'm a one-man operation. I'm not a factory. These aren't done on machines. So this takes me, a week and a half to get through all this process and get all this done. So there you go. And we'll see you next time.